You're listening to the Second Look podcast, where we take a closer look at what we're learning each Sunday at Connection Church to help you grow in your walk with Christ. Here are your hosts, Pastor Joe Terreri and Pastor Dan DeRochers.
Welcome to the Second Look. My name is Dan.
And I'm Joe.
And we are here talking about faith is an action word. But first, hi, Joe.
Good morning, Daniel.
Joe, one thing that probably everybody knows about you is you are a very decisive human.
I mean, pretty much.
For the most part.
For the most part, yes, that's true.
You at least play one on TV.
Yes, exactly.
Joe, what happens on the inside of you when you are in a situation where there's a decision that needs to be made and you are not in charge?
Oh my goodness. Dan, why are you asking me about the biggest character flaw that I have? Why are we starting here on this podcast?
Because we're starting cold, as we just said 5 seconds before the countdown.
I was actually hoping you would do your impression that you always do of Fozzie Bear before we start the podcast. And yet you're asking me about one of the deepest sources of pain for me and everyone who knows me. Thank you, Dan.
You're welcome.
Yes. And most people don't know this about me. When I ask someone, where do you want to go to lunch? And then they tell me where they'd like to go to lunch, I usually let them tell me where they want to go to lunch, and then I'll tell them where we are going to lunch. And so that's just part of who I am. And this is good. I was hoping to maybe do a little Monday morning therapy.
Yeah, it is. It's a therapy. Yeah, it's a therapy session in front of 3 cameras.
Yeah, and I know that this will be held against me by all who know me well. All right. Anyway.
So what happens on the inside, Joe? Like
that's a serious question.
So in a situation where you're not in charge.
Yep.
And yet a decision needs to be made. What is the internal Joe Terreri dialogue?
Oh, it usually goes something like this. This isn't going well. Someone needs to step up. That person is me. Because this is just really how I think. If you really want to know, I'm always looking around saying, who's got this handled? And if I don't see anyone around who has it handled, I always is just like, well, I guess it's got to be me. But here's what's interesting. When I am in a room with really good leaders, I actually have a lot less internal anxiety because I know it's covered. So I actually know it's weird. Like, and I'm not saying I'm good at it all the time or my assessment is always right. I am not saying that, but it's just like this internal filter I go to. So when I go into a room and I know things are covered, I just am chill. But when I see things not going well and no one else is noticing, then I got to start maneuvering. And that's really what goes on inside of me because I feel deeply responsible inside. And it's actually like there's something really good about it. I feel responsible for other people.
Yeah.
But there's also something really bad about it, which is, and I'm the one who's going to solve the problem. Right. So it's, I'm so glad we could talk about this, Dan. Thank you for coming to the last edition of the podcast. So
No. This has a connection to faith, right?
Okay.
So when you are in that room of leaders and you know it's covered, you're confident in the outcome of whatever's going to be presented there.
Yeah, I don't have to think about it.
Right. So when we're talking about faith, right? Hebrews 11:1, faith is confidence, right? It's being sure of what we hope for, certain of what we don't see, not certain of what we see, not seeing all of the materials ahead of us and, this is going to go well because I see something, but your confidence in a room where it's handled is, I don't actually see that it's done, but I'm confident that it's going to be done.
Absolutely. And that really is faith.
And when we're walking with Jesus, right? Faith in an unseen God, knowing that He's got it covered. It's similar to walking into that situation. Now, not everybody walks into a room and has that assessment of like wondering what's going to happen, but we all walk around life wondering what's going to happen.
Absolutely. You know, it's interesting. It's sort of like when you fly. I don't know about you, but I always want to get a good look at the pilot before we fly.
Size him up.
Size him or her up and be like, all right, I want to see my pilot have a little bit of gray hair.
Yeah.
I don't want anyone who just looked like they graduated from flight school.
Yep.
But it really is that thing. It's like, I want to know that it's handled. And that really is the life of faith with God, that our lives are ultimately in His hands and that He does have it covered and He is looking out for us. And I think that is something that we all struggle with, regardless of personality on a human scale and our leadership capacities or lack thereof. But in life, we are really asking the question is, who's got my back? Who's going to cover it? And to walk with Jesus is to say, he's got me.
Yeah.
And he's actually got everything. In fact, he's got the whole world.
Yeah.
And that is something that we really need to think about as we think about what it means to live by faith.
So here's my question, though. We can have confidence, but do we actually have that confidence if there's no action? Right? The kind of the premise of Andrew's message yesterday was faith is an action word. So, I was thinking about that this morning and thinking about people that have a lot of confidence or talk a big game about sports or their own abilities or investing, right? People that are like, oh, I know the way.
Yeah.
But no one wants to go to a financial advisor who's broke.
Right.
Right. No one.
Or a personal trainer who's not in shape.
Yeah. Or someone who purports to have abilities or skills or confidence, but you don't actually see evidence of that.
Wow.
So, is it actually faith now take it into the spiritual realm, is it actually faith if we're not taking steps of faith?
Well, I think there's a real fine line between waiting on God and taking things into your own hands.
Yeah.
So I do think as God's people, we need to have a bias towards action. Like I really do think we should be action oriented. Like by faith, we share our faith. By faith, we give our money. By faith, we serve. By faith, we show up when we don't feel like it. Like we have to have an action part to our faith. And even in the story, like we see Ruth, Naomi basically said twice, don't come with me.
Yeah.
No, really, don't come with me. And Ruth's like, no, you don't understand. I'm coming with you. Like your pain and heartache is going to become my pain and heartache. I'm not like... Nothing can separate us other than death. I mean, what an incredible picture of loyalty, of faith, of just like, and Ruth has no idea what's going to happen when they get back to Bethlehem, and we're going to talk about that this weekend. But yes, our faith needs to be action-oriented, and yet we still need to be on guard, and now we're going kind of outside of the story of Ruth, maybe talking about the big picture of life with God. We still need to be weary of trying to make things happen for ourselves in our own strength. And I think this comes down to, are we acting by faith or are we acting out of fear? Like, for example, if you have a job that you don't love and you want to get a new job, by faith, you start looking for a new job. That's okay. And, I think work is always an interesting one. It's like, okay, I'm just going to sit here and wait for someone to email me a job if I'm unemployed. Like, I don't think that's living by faith. I think we need to take action with our lives. But at the same time, there are going to be moments in our life where there's actually nothing to do other than pray and wait on God. And we need to know that's also part of it. So yes, we need to take action. Faith is an action word, but the scriptures also say that those who wait on the Lord will renew their strength. And so there's a tension there, and wisdom and discernment requires us to know which is which. And we're going to see, and in Ruth again this weekend, we're going to see Ruth take a pretty awesome step of faith, and we're going to see her faith in action once again.
So in this moment in the story with Ruth, her mother-in-law, it was so interesting that we see parts of the life of Naomi and how she's really having there's a narrative there of all of the negative things that have happened.
Yeah, Naomi kind of seems like a person you don't want to run into at a party.
Right.
You ever around those people and the only thing they ever want to tell you is everything that's wrong with their life?
Yes.
Yeah, and so you get there and you're just like, and I'm not, we need friends to share our lives with, and I'm not saying
therapy sessions at the beginning of podcasts.
Yeah. I mean, but it's like Naomi is like this there's this one person that Cheryl and I used to know way long time ago back in Buffalo, and we went out to dinner with them once, and like we started the conversation like, how you doing? And not good. And like every time we were with this person, she always said, how you doing? It's like, not good. At one level, I appreciate her vulnerability. At another level, it's like, we're not going to hang out anymore. Yeah. Like, but that's Naomi, right? Like she's just seems like, I mean, don't call me pleasant, call me bitter. Yeah. It's like, oh yeah, my good friend bitterness over here. Like, who wants to hang around with someone like that?
Well, in fairness, her children were named, Sick and Tired.
Yeah, so. Yeah. That's funny.
But here we are. We have that little piece of Naomi's story, and we have Ruth, who's the foreigner, who doesn't own the relationship with Naomi's God. And she turns to God and goes all in a situation that has basically 0% chance that she's going to thrive.
That's such a wonderful way to put it. And you really see and we're going to see it again this week, like just the beauty of who Ruth is, like her heart, her loyalty, her steadfastness. I read the story again before we started the podcast. It's like, I love how it says in that text that Ruth clung to Naomi. Like just the kindness of that act of saying, I got you. Like, just think about the love that she has for her mother-in-law. And, I think mother-in-laws jokes are, easy to make, right? And yet you see this woman who just has this, she can probably see the bitterness and the pain all over. And to be fair to Naomi's lost a lot.
Everything.
Yeah, she's lost everything.
Literally everything.
Exactly. So we can make light of it at one level. At another level, she's a real person who really lost her husband and her sons.
Yes.
Like, of course she's going to be absolutely devastated. Yeah. And in her devastation, Ruth stays close to her. What a picture of friendship.
Wow.
What a picture of, and this word that I was just thinking about yesterday during the message is just like loyalty. Like, we are so missing in our culture right now the faith that it takes to stay loyal through the ups and downs of relationships, through the ups and downs of marriages, through the ups and downs of even things with our churches, I mean, and I'm not saying we should stay loyal through every, we shouldn't stay loyal through abuse. We shouldn't stay loyal. Like, I want to be clear about that. But like, just like, loyalty and consumerism never go together.
That's really good.
And loyalty and my image never go together. And what we see in Ruth is just, and I think one of the things that's going to be so obvious in the story, how Ruth starts to build incredible influence through loyalty.
Yeah. One thing that was brought out in the sermon yesterday is that faith is not just blind hope.
Yeah.
That everything will work out. So what about this situation with Ruth, who has basically 0% chance of thriving, makes it faith and not just blind hope?
Well, I mean, it's tough to get inside Ruth's mind right in this moment, but I think she really believes something in her. And even if you look at the words closely, like Naomi says, go back to your gods, small g. Yeah. And then Ruth, when she makes really the most famous part of the story of Ruth, when she says,
beautiful
when passage. She said, your God,
will be my
capital
God.
G will be my God. There is something about Naomi. So this is interesting. There's something about Naomi's faith, even in her devastation, that Ruth was attracted to. And so I think Ruth is really saying, I believe in God. And so maybe Ruth saw the emptiness of her own, paganism, and saw something about, Yahweh that she really wanted to be a part of. And I think that, but I think to your point, Dan, about how is faith not just blind hope, I think that's one of the biggest misnomers about Christianity. And I thought Andrew did a really good job explaining, like, Jesus rose from the dead, right? And people then gave their lives to it. Yeah. And not just a handful of lunatics.
Yeah.
Like, people for generations have been giving their lives for the cause of Christ because Jesus Christ lives, and our hope is that we will be with him forever and that he is with us. And so I just think that this idea that somehow the Christian life is just a leap into blind faith is actually, we're not doing that. Like, I'm not doing that with my life. I think there's awesome reasons to believe that God is real, and even the scriptures tell us, how do you know God is real? Walk outside and just ask yourself, find something beautiful to look at and just say, hey, is this all by accident? Or did all the gobbledygook of the universe just come together and create this beauty? I mean, beauty alone is an apologetic for God.
Yeah.
Beautiful people, beautiful scenery, love itself, the transcendence that comes from having like people in our lives who love us through thick and thin, like all of these point to God. And then in a specific way, the cross of Jesus Christ, the empty tomb, his followers, the miracle of his word that God has spoken to us, the continuity of that. So I just think there's so many reasons for us to believe. And my faith is not blind hope. Like I really believe with every fiber in my soul that God is real.
Can you help for people for whom faith is difficult, right? Some people have a gifting of faith, right? Where it's just it's unbelievable how they just walk so, I don't know if it's closely with the Lord or whatever it is, but there's just this. What about people who deal with anxiety?
Yeah.
And who deal with things that seem maybe counterintuitive to living a life of faith?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing I would say is believing that God is real does not mean you also think life is easy. And I think that's where we get confused, because people who believe God is real still struggle with mental illness. People who believe God is real still get cancer. People who believe God is real still have financial crisis in their life. People who think God is real still lose loved ones. So I think that we should never conflate the reality of God with an easy life.
Yeah.
Because I do think, and I do think the thought is out there in the world that if God was real, bad things would never happen. And God wouldn't allow bad things to happen. And I would say, no, because bad things happen, it reveals in our soul that this world can't possibly be all there is, that we're made for more, that the brokenness actually speaks. Because I think we all know in our heart of hearts, it's not supposed to be this way. And if we think that there is a way it's supposed to be, I think that actually is a testimony to the reality that we were made for something more. And I know that might be a little complex or heady, but it actually, when you think about it, the fact that we know that the world is broken speaks to the fact that we should be living with some kind of hope that it will be better someday.
That's such an interesting thing to think about. I want to go one step more into that and talk about faith that Jesus rose from the dead versus faith to move forward into the unknown or walk with Jesus more or give him more access to a certain part of our life. Can you just talk a little bit about the faith journey and kind of our minimum viable faith, and then as faith builds as we walk with Jesus?
Well, I think that the most important word you said there is journey. That life with God is really a journey. And so God is with us all the time when we come to Christ. Okay, so just start at the very beginning. You put your faith in Jesus Christ. You go through an experience called being regenerated, or you get saved per se, and so you become a new person. And the moment we become a new person, we are given the Spirit of God, that the Spirit of God lives inside all believers. And so we don't just have faith in a vacuum, or we're not drummed. Faith is not something we're drumming up. We are literally people who are to be led by the Spirit. So to live a life of faith is a continual yielding. And I use that word yielding. Just think about driving. When you yield, you're letting someone else go before you go. And to be led by the Spirit means that you're yielding to the work of the Spirit in your life. And so I think that the life of faith is constantly saying yes to the invitations from the Spirit of God to trust him. And here's how that looks at the most basic level. We obey what we find in Scripture. Like, that is the first place of faith, obedience to what God has laid out in His Word. And then there's other places we go in faith where the Lord is asking us to step out in faith in ways where He's asking us to go somewhere or maybe leave something. You know, maybe you're a single person and you're in a relationship that you know is toxic or does not honor the Lord, and you know that this person isn't best for you. And by faith, you walk away from a stable dating relationship where you're hoping, you know, you really want to be married, but you see that this person is not interested in the life of faith. And so by faith, you say, it's better to be single than it is to be married to someone who doesn't love Jesus. And
Wow.
by the way, that's always true.
Yeah.
And so, or maybe you're in a job and you're seeing that your company is doing things in a way that is deceptive and illegal, and you know you don't want to be involved in that. And so you have to walk away from steady income because your integrity and honoring Jesus with your life is more important.
Yeah.
Or another act of faith, you're wrestling with secret sin and you hate it.
Yeah.
And you know that's not what God has for you. So by faith, you share it, you confess it. James 5:16, you know, confess your sins one to another so you can be healed. You confess your sin to a brother or a sister in Christ, and you bring your life into the light by faith. And you experience, and by the way, when you bring your life into the light, guess what you get? Forgiveness, healing, freedom, joy, peace, and people know you. And listen, everyone who's followed Jesus, we all come to this point where you have to be known.
Yeah.
And that's all part of living by faith. And you know, Dan, I know in your life, there was time where you and Alicia felt called to missions. And so you had to say yes to that by faith. You left your work at Valley Forge, and Alicia did as well. And you guys, you know, you raised money and you went to be missionaries for 5 years. And so, like, that is the life of faith. Like, God's call comes and we say yes. And, you know, God's not going to ask everyone to leave their job. I want to be so clear about that. Maybe for some people, the life of faith will involve adoption or foster care. But the question, and I love this, I heard a pastor, his name's Jerry Gillis, say this once, and I'll even say it sometime when I'm preaching. The life of faith is really this: is your yes on the table before you know what the question is? And that is really an important part of the life of faith. Are we living a yes to God kind of life, no matter what the question is?
That's so good, Joe. And even in other situations, is your yes on the table before you know what the answer is? And that would be like if you propose a restaurant for lunch. My yes has to be on the table before I know what the question is.
Because that's where we're going to go.
It obviously is. This has been another episode of The Second Look. You can catch this sermon and much more at our website, cometoconnect.com. Have a great week.